Okay, we have a few days till Rosh HaShana.
Yeah.
So, I thought I would speak tonight about the Shofar. But before I get to it, I'd like to add an appendix to the chat we had in Motzei Shabbos. We were discussing eitzes, ways to win on technicalities, if you will. That for those of us who aren't absolutely righteous, what can we do to tip the scales of justice in our favor? We gave 3 suggestions. I'd like to mention a 4th. And it's something that I actually spoke about in Rosh HaShana years ago on Yom Kippur. And I think it's worth repeating. There's a tremendous power of Kabbalah, making a resolution. When a person commits himself to a course of action, that is a very powerful thing in tipping the scales of justice in our favor. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos which says something which at first glance is very cryptic. It says there are 2 types of people, at least that the Mishnah is discussing. There's one type which is Chachmaso Meruba Minaiso. The person knows more than he does. Okay, we all know people like that. You know, they have a lot of knowledge, but they don't put it into practice. So the Mishnah talks about that category of person, the person whose wisdom is more than his deeds. But the Mishnah also discusses the opposite, the person who is Maisav Merubim Michachmaso. He does more than he knows. So the difficulty is, how can a person do more than he knows? You can know more than you do, but how do you do more than you know? If you don't know, how do you do? So Rabbi Yonah, in his commentary to Pirkei Avos, says the following. He says, if a person makes a commitment that I will do what the Torah tells me to do, I will do what the Shulchan Aruch tells me to do, I will do what the rabbis tell me to do, then all the merit that flows from that commitment is added to his account in advance. And that's they have a person who has more merit. He has more deeds than knowledge. Not that he actually has performed the deeds, but he has the merit of all the deeds that are going to follow from that commitment. And the example he gives, and it's based on a medrash, is that when the Jews said at Har Sinai, Nasa v'nishma, that we accept upon ourselves to do God's will even before we hear His directives, all the merit, all the schus of all the good deeds that would flow from that commitment would be credited to their account in advance. And that's how you have Maisav Merubim Michachmaso, a person who has more deeds than the knowledge. So let's say a person makes a pledge. A person says that I am going to study Torah a half hour a day. And he makes this pledge before Rosh HaShana, let's say. And he lives up to the pledge. That over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, he fulfills his pledge and he learns Torah a half hour a day. The merit of all that Torah learning that's going to follow in the future is already credited to his account in advance before this Rosh Hashanah at the time he made the pledge. Now this is an amazing, amazing thing. If you're talking about trying to tip the scales in your benefit, imagine if you can bank on next year's merits or the next decade's merits. It's pretty good. It's like in advance.
What happens if you default on the loan?
Well, that's a very interesting thing. There is a Ran in Maseches Nedarim that discusses exactly this. The Chazal say that there was a practice, people used to make pledges in times of tsar, times of trouble. We learned from Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu made such a pledge. When he was leaving Eretz Yisrael, he was going to the house of Lavan, so he made certain pledges that if the Rebbeinu Shalom keeps his word, then this stone I will make into a sanctuary. Whatever you give me, I will give a tithe. So Chazal say from here we see that it's a meritorious deed that in times of danger a person should make a pledge. So the Ran says like this. The Ran says an amazing thing, that if a person makes a pledge and doesn't carry it out, even if the reason he doesn't carry it out is because he is constrained by circumstances beyond his control. It's called an onus. Nevertheless, there's no merit that is granted to him for having made the commitment. In other words, it's not that he's rewarded for the good intention. It's that all the deeds that actually flow from the commitment are credited in advance. But if no deeds flow from the commitment, even if that is because of an onus, he doesn't have that merit. That's what the Round says.
It's a curious thing, because it may take 10 years before it's known whether that commitment is met.
Right.
No. If a person makes a commitment not to do a single thing, I'm making a commitment to study a half hour a day.
Right.
So you'll know tomorrow whether you kept it. For tomorrow
you will have kept it, but in the 8th year, you missed 3 years.
No. So it's true. So you won't have the merit of those 2 years, but the merit of the 6 years you'll have.
You will.
You kept the commitment for 6 years.
I know he's thinking what I was thinking, that you're gonna start getting the
No.
reward right now.
No, every good deed that follows from the pledge, you are rewarded for in advance. If there are days you miss, then you're not getting credit for having had good intentions.
But you're getting credit for the days.
But the days you did what you're meant to do.
Well, then you're collecting after.
No.
You're collecting when you do the good deed.
No, you get it in advance.
This is
God looks into the future. God sees that you made this commitment, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, that day you're going to miss. The days that you do show up, you're credited for in advance.
Because he knows it's
predestination.
Right.
But this is an amazing thing. This is an amazing thing that really you're looking to amass mitzvahs. You can amass years of mitzvahs in advance by taking the plunge, making a commitment. I pointed out then in the talk on Rosh HaShana that you can use this technique to leverage your merit. And I said that one of the most powerful commitments you can make is that tshuva will be an ongoing part of your life. Because we tend to treat tshuva as something which is seasonal. This is tshuva season. Elul, Rosh HaShana, Seres Mei Tshuva. So we engage in a certain amount of introspection and self-improvement, and then when the Kippur passes, okay, we put tshuva back in the closet for a year. But if a person would decide that tshuva is going to be a part of my life, and it makes a resolution, I'm going to engage in introspection, in cheshbon hanefesh, self-assessment, once a week. There's going to be a specific time where I'm going to engage in this type of introspection. If there's something that can be repaired, I'm going to straighten it out. So therefore, tshuva now becomes something which is not just for this time of year. It's something which he engages in on an ongoing basis. It means the merit of that tshuva accrues to his account now. That means even tshuva he hasn't done yet. He hasn't done tshuva yet. But the tshuva I'm going to do will accrue to my account. So let's say, for example, it's Rosh HaShana, and a person thinks about himself and realizes, there's an area of observance where I'm really lax, but there isn't enough time now to deal with this meaningfully. I'm not going to be successful. It's not going to be effective. I just can't reorganize my life to the extent necessary to tackle this problem. So you figure, you're stuck with that or not necessarily. If a person makes a pledge, okay, I can't do anything about it now, but I'm going to address this the day after Yom Kippur. I'm going to address this every Rosh Chodesh. I'm going to address this at a specific time. And I make a pledge to really deal with it. Then everything accrues to your account in advance. Now, this is a very important technique for another reason. Comes Rosh HaShana, comes Yom Kippur, we're very, very inspired. We're willing to commit ourselves to anything. You come to Shul, Yom Kippur, you really, I'm going to learn 5 hours a day. I'm going to say 100 Kapitlach Tilim a day. Now then, right after Yom Kippur comes the short period of preparation for Sukkot, and you got to build your sukkah, and you got to buy your lulav, and you got to prepare for Yom Tov, and maybe you have to do some shopping and whatnot. And then all the whole program, the whole schedule that you laid out for davening and for learning and for mitzvahs, etc., falls by the wayside because this period is so out of the ordinary. It's so interrupted, especially if you're trying to juggle a career at the same time. You know, and you're missing days of work, and you have to crowd your professional activities into the days available. But imagine the following. Imagine the person says, you know, right now I can't make a commitment. If I make a commitment, it's going to be something I'm not going to be able to keep. But I pledge now on Yom Kippur for Rosh HaShana that on the day after Simchas Torah, when things settle down, I am going to make a schedule for myself, for learning, for davening, etc., etc., etc. And on that day, it'll probably be very effective. On that day, you're not flying high. Now, you've had time to settle down. You're probably a little more rational. You don't have the distractions that Yontif causes. So probably the commitments you make on that day will be very, very reasonable and very, very effective. And you'll get the merit of those commitments in advance because you resolved on Rosh HaShana or Yom Kippur that you were going to deal with it then. So it's a tremendously powerful technique. So something that I felt I wanted to share with you in advance, that hopefully you can put this to good use, and all of us using it, and using the other pieces of advice, should be Zoicha B'din, should merit, in our case, for a year of health and prosperity, happiness, success.
Amen.
I want to talk about Shofar a little bit. You know, Shofar is the main mitzvah of Rosh HaShana. And I'm going to share with you an idea that was written in an article by Dr. Isidore Twersky, who was a great scholar of the Rambam Maimonides. And I'm not totally convinced of his thesis, but I think that it is thought-provoking. There's a very famous Rambam that everyone knows. The Rambam writes, "Afal pi shetkiyas shofar b'Rosh HaShana gzeras hakasuv," even though the sounding of the shofar in Rosh HaShana is a decree of the Torah, remez yeshbo, there is a hint. It alludes to something. Again, whenever we talk about a mitzvah, our attempt to give reasons is at best speculation. We can't say with a certainty what God had in mind. So ultimately it's a decree of the Torah, yet there is a hint. Kolaimar, it means to say, Uru yesheinam mishinaschem, wake up, you sleepy people from your sleep. V'akitzu nirdomim mitayemaschem, and slumberers, wake from your slumber. V'chipsu b'masechem v'chizu b'tshuva. Search your deeds and repent. V'zichru barachem, remember your Creator. To what people are we referring? Elu hashoikhim asa'emas, these are the people who forget the truth. B'havle hazman, for the foolishness of the times. What are the havle hazman? So the simple interpretation is that every time has its own foolishness, has its own fads. You know, we live in a time that there is a TV show that everyone has to see, or the book everyone has to read, or the movie everyone has to attend, and so on and so forth. And you think about it for a moment, you realize it's really a waste of time. Who cares? It's not important. So that would be the Havle Hazman. I think people that are sports fans sometimes fall into this trap as well. I mean, how important is it what the Raptors do, what the Maple Leafs do? I mean, it's Blue Jays. Now, Havle Hazman. So they forget the truth. V'shoigim kol shnosam, and they delve the entire year. They waste the entire year. V'hevel v'rik, in vanity and emptiness. Asher lo yoel v'lo yatzil, which does not help and does not save. So habitu nafshosechem, look into your souls. V'tivu darkeichem ma'alechem, improve your ways. V'yazev kol echad mekem darko hara, let every person leave his evil way. V'machshavto asher lo tov, and is not good thought. So everyone assumes that what is this remes? How does the shofar allude to this idea of waking up? Because the shofar makes a very loud sound. Everyone assumes that's what it means. The shofar makes a very loud sound. It's a frightening sound. The Navi expresses this idea that if the shofar sounded in the city, who is not going to be scared? Everyone is petrified. The sound of the shofar, the siren, the alarm. And that's what it is. The sound of the shofar is a wake-up call, a spiritual wake-up call. And everyone assumes that's what the Rambam means. It's a little bit of a problem. I'll raise one objection, and I'll tell you Dr. Tversky's objection to this approach. My objection is, okay, it's very good. It's a wake-up call. It's a loud, shrill sound. But how did the Rambam know that it refers to this specific type of sinner? The person forgets the truth because of the foolishness of the time. I mean, there are many root causes of sin. A person, let's say, for example, overeats. Maybe he eats not kosher food because he's a glutton, so he can't exercise restraint. This would not be a person who we would say has forsaken the truth for the foolishness of the time. You know, fads come and go, but eating is eternal. This is not one of the Havlei Hazman. Now, this is something that we do. We are constituted in such a way that we have to eat. And if you can't restrain your desire, then you'll eat things that aren't kosher in a gluttonous way. So the Rambam is making an assumption here that the shofar, the sound of the shofar, somehow addresses a very, very specific type of sinner, the sinner who has forgotten the truth because of the Havlei Hazman, because of the fads, the foolishness of the time. Well, what in the shofar alludes to that? If the Rambam is simply making a statement that since it's a loud, shrill sound, it wakes us up out of our slumber, I mean, there are many different types of slumber. And why does he assume that it refers specifically to these people that forget the truth for the Havlei Hazman? That's a question that can be raised on the Rambam. There's another question on the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't stop where I stopped. The Rambam continues. And he says, Lefikach, therefore, Sarach kol adam she'ira atzmo kol hashana kula, a person should see himself the entire year, ki'ilu chetzio zaka v'chetzio chayev, as if he's exactly 50-50. V'chein kolu olam chetzio zaka v'chetzio chayev, and he should see the whole world as being 50-50. Chata chet echad, if he does one sin, harayachriya atzmo v'chriya as kol olam kula kat chayev. He tips the scales not only for himself, but for the entire world to the side of chova, of guilt, and he could be guilty of causing destruction for the entire world. Also, mitzvah achas, if he does one mitzvah, harayachriya atzmo, he tipped himself to the side of merit, v'chriya kol ha'olam kulu l'kafschus, and the entire world to the kafschus, and caused them great salvation. What is the lefikach? What is the therefore? How does this follow from the Rambam previously said? The shofar is a wake-up call. We assume it means because, again, it's like a siren. It makes a loud noise, so it calls us to repentance. How does it follow from that a person should see himself as if he's 50-50 and see the entire world as if it's 50-50, and one mitzvah makes a difference, one avera makes a difference? I mean, it's a true point. But what does this have to do with the sound of the shofar? What's the connection? Like, because this is true, this is the symbolism of the shofar, therefore a person should see himself this way. I mean, either the person should see himself this way or not see himself this way, but what does the sound of the shofar add to make this insight more compelling? Do you have an answer?
I have a thought. I'm not sure it's an answer. It seems to me that the Rambam is addressing not the extremes on either side of good and evil. That he's addressing a group of people for whom they've kind of unconsciously fell into this behavior pattern. And they can be redeemed and they can straighten it out if they wake up. They'll have an awareness of their situation. The person who's really committed to, a life of debauchery won't be affected by the shofar, I think is what he's saying. He's saying that those people who are trendy can be shaken from that. And they're not in the area of so far gone.
So you understand it this way, that if a person sees himself as 50-50, then he will be aroused by the shofar. But if the person is committed to one of the extremes, then even the shofar won't help.
Yeah.
Okay, that could be. That's what the Rambam means. Maybe there's another interpretation.
Maybe the Rambam's not talking about the sound of the shofar. Maybe he's talking about the memory that it's supposed to evoke and
So, good point. So, Dr. Twersky says that the assumption that the Rambam somehow was talking about the sound of the shofar is something that we tend to read into the Rambam. The Rambam says that there's a hint of the shofar, and it tells us to wake up, so we jump to the conclusion, it's an allusion to the sound. But that's an assumption. And the Rambam didn't say that explicitly. I think 99% of the people that read the Rambam walk away with that impression. But again, it's not explicit in the Rambam. The Rambam does not say that it's the sound of the shofar which somehow wakes us up. And he makes an amazing grammatical point, and this is the entire starting point of his article, that the word tekiah shofar, the term tekiah shofar, he shows some other Rambams that tekiah is a feminine word, feminine noun, and shofar is a masculine noun. So when you refer to the tekiah, the proper pronoun would be ba. If you refer to the shofar, the pronoun would be bo, which is male. So if the meaning of the Rambam was to say that the sound of the shofar somehow is an allusion to this idea of waking up, then the Rambam should have said that even though it's a gezeres hakosov, remez yesh ba, there is a hint in the sounding of the shofar. The pronoun ba would refer to the sounding, which is feminine, because that's the hint. The hint is that the sound of the shofar is a wake-up call. But instead, the Rambam uses the masculine pronoun, remez yesh bo, which modifies the shofar, not the tekiah, not the sounding, the shofar. And therefore, what the Rambam really is saying is that the hint is not in the sound of the shofar, but the hint is in the shofar itself. Now again, I have to digest that. I'm not saying that I'm totally convinced, but this is his contention, that the hint of the Rambam is not to the sound of the shofar, but to the shofar itself, something about the nature, the object, is a wake-up call. Not that the sound is a wake-up call, but that the object is a wake-up call. Even though the sounding of the shofar is a decree of the Torah, but there's a remez bo, there's a remez in the shofar itself. Now, what would that remez be? Well, we know that the shofar, the object of the shofar, as opposed to the sound of the shofar, alludes to the Akedah. And it happens to be that in the Rambam Shita, the Rambam's own opinion, the halachic aspects, this connection is tighter than it would have been otherwise. Now, there is a great dispute in the Rishonim as to what type of horn is kosher for a shofar. And we're not going to go into the detail of the whole sugya Masechus Rosh HaShana, it's a little complex. But the opinion of Tosfos, and in fact the Ravid, who's the Rambam's critic, in Hilchos Shofar, is that really any shofar is kosher, of any animal. Now a shofar is a very specific type of horn. A shofar is a hollow horn. Now, it's a horn that the material that fills the horn is not the same material as what the horn is made of. So, for example, a ram's horn, the horn is keratin, and it's filled with cartilage. So you remove the cartilage and you're left with a hollow horn, as opposed to a deer's antler, which is solid material through and through. So shofar, the Rishonim explained, is miloshn shfoferes. Shfoferes is a tube. It has to be a hollow horn. A deer's antler you can't make into a shofar. But any animal's horn, a goat's horn or a ram's horn, which is naturally hollow, is a kosher shofar. And this is how most Rishonim rule. The Rambam disagrees. The shita of the Rambam is that it must specifically be a ram's horn. Now, even the other Rishonim who hold that all horns are kosher agrees that lechatchila, preferably, you should use a ram's horn. Because there's a Gemara in Maseches Rosh HaShana, earlier in the Masechta, which says, why do we blow with the ram's horn? To remember the Elo Shel Yitzchak, to remember the ram of the Akedah. So there is something to it, to using a ram's horn. But according to most Rishonim, it's only a preference. Of course, any horn is kosher, but there's a preference to using the ram's horn. But the opinion of the Rambam is, in Hilchas Shofar, that only a ram's horn is kosher. Any other horn is invalid. That's the Rambam's opinion. It must be a ram's horn. Because he understands that when the Gemara says, why do we blow a ram's horn to remember the Akedah? It's specifically a ram's horn. And the answer is because it reminds us of the Akedah. So according to all the other Rishonim, the Akedah is something extra. You know, the fundamental mitzvah you can fulfill with any horn. But we prefer to use the ram's horn because the ram's horn reminds us of the Akedah. But according to the Rambam's shot in the Gemara, the shofar must be a ram's horn, and the Gemara says the reason for that is because it reminds us of the Akedah. So according to the Rambam, the connection to the Akedah is much stronger than according to any other opinion. Because according to all other opinions, it's only a preference. According to the Rambam, it must be a ram's horn. Nothing else would be valid. And that's because it's meant to remind us of the Akedah. Well, what lesson do we learn from the Akedah? What lesson do we learn from the Akedah? So the lesson we learn from the Akedah is, the Rambam himself writes in the Moreh Nevuchim, is, you see from here, how a Jew is meant to approach life. That all the things that are conventionally desirable, a Jew must be ready and willing to forego for the sake of God's command. Take Avraham Avinu. Now, in his position, and we know the story, what was the most precious thing to him? A child. This is what he begged God for. He said that what can you give me if I am childless? Nothing is any value. I'm not going to be here forever. What will I pass it down to? So to Avram, this is the most precious thing that he has. And God says, give it up. He's ready to give it up. And therefore, this is a reminder to us. And as we engage in the Havlei Hazman, we engage in all sorts of foolishness. You know, my favorite TV show, my favorite sports team, my favorite drink, my favorite whatever. You know, every so often you stumble across an article where they interview people that if you had to live on a desert island for 6 months, what would you take with you? You know, and this person says, I would take this food, I would take this drink, I would take this book, I would take this DVD, I would take... Right? I just read today an article about Rav Neuver Tzechet Tzadik Levracha, the author of the Sefer Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, passed away this year. And he was in Amsterdam during the Holocaust. For 3 years, his family was in hiding. And what did they have to keep themselves busy? He had a Gemara Ksubas and the third chelek of the Mishnah Berurah, the part of the Mishnah Berurah on Hilchas Shabbos. That's what they had for 3 years. And of course, needless to say, he became the world's biggest expert in Hilchos Shabbos. He wrote the book, right? Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasa. And it's an amazing thing how he came to write the book. First, he was an expert in Hilchos Shabbos. Imagine it. You have 2 Svarim for 3 years in hiding. And one of them is Nishbur Hilchos Shabbos. He must have known it backwards and forwards. That's all they had. But he wrote the Sefer, a very interesting story, let's mention as an aside, that he was in, after the war was over, where he was very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. And there was a ship leaving for Israel on Shabbos. And the question was, should he board the ship? So he determined that it was pikuach nefesh. It was a question of life and death. So the ship was leaving, and if he wasn't going to get on the ship, who knows what would be. He'd be stuck there in this very dangerous place. So we got on the ship on Shabbos, and the ship ended up not leaving for several days. So it turned out that his boarding the ship really was unnecessary, because he could have boarded after Shabbos. It would have left at the same time. So he was very, very heartbroken that somehow, how did it come to pass he should violate Shabbos? So he made a vow to himself that when he arrives in Eretz Yisrael, he is going to do something for the honor of Shabbos. So he wrote what really is the first modern work on Hilchos Shabbos, the first standalone work on Hilchos Shabbos in the 20th century, which became like the standard text for Hilchos Shabbos. And it was translated into 12 languages and published in several editions already, and it was because of that vow. But in any case, if he was on a desert island, he asked, what are you going to take? I'll take a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel Hilchos Shabbos. That's what I'll take. But all of us, we can't surrender. We can't give up these foolish things. But you see from Avraham Avinu, not that way. You see that Avraham Avinu was ready and willing for God's command to give up not something foolish, something very, very valuable. Because that's what a Jew has to do. A Jew has to be ready to give up something for God. And therefore it's a wake-up call to all you people who are so bound, not you people, I mean, to all those people who are bound to foolishness, right? And the whole year they're engaged in the Havlei Hazman, right? Which have no benefit, don't achieve anything, don't accomplish anything. You got to be ready to give it up. That's what you learn from the Akedah. The Akedah teaches me you have to be ready to sacrifice. You have to be ready to give up even valuable things, and certainly foolish things, for God's will. So that addresses his problem. The ba and the bow. That the hint is not from the sound of the shofar, the hint is from the object, from the bow, the shofar. It also addresses the other question, which is that why does it allude specifically to those who forget the truth? Because that's what we learn from the Akedah. We learn from the Akedah that you have to sacrifice even important things. Needless to say, you have to sacrifice nonsensical things. But it doesn't address the other point that I had, which is, so what is the connection? What is the idea of looking at the world as if it's 50-50? How does that follow from the Akedah? I think there's another idea over here. Let me share with you a mystical insight about the shofar. And it's written by the Ramchal, from Moshe Chaim Lutzato, great Mukubal. But the truth is that I think we can bring it down to earth. It doesn't have to be one of those lofty, mystical thoughts. It's something which is really very practical. He writes like this. He says that from the time of the sin of Adam Harishon, good and evil in the world became blended. They became mixed. It's very hard to extricate the good from the evil. This was a consequence of the sin of Adam Harishon. And God's plan for history is that there should be a tikkun, that good should be freed from evil and ultimately be able to suppress and conquer evil. This is the plan. And he writes, Ubizman hamatan Torah. When the Torah was given, this was the beginning of that process of tikkun. Hine yotza hatoiv mitoich hara. The good was able to remove itself from under the control of the evil. V'nizgaber v'shalat. And it became strengthened. V'omnom lo higia adayin lios hu kovesh es hara tachto. No, the time didn't come yet for good to conquer evil. That will only come later. But Avol higia lo tzeis mi masro. The time for good to leave its prison did come. Ulischazik bi atzmo. So good is strengthened, but it stands in its own right. It stands in opposition to evil, but it does not yet have enough strength to conquer evil. Because imagine the following scenario. You have two people engaged in a fight, Reuven and Shimon. So at one point, Reuven is sitting on Shimon. At another point, Shimon is sitting on Reuven. So Shimon is sitting on Reuven. At this point, Reuven has strengthened himself to the extent that he's able to throw his opponent off. He isn't yet strong enough to put him in a headlock. But in his own right, he is standing. The time will come that this tikkun will be complete. And good will conquer evil entirely. And that tikkun will be complete in the Yemos HaMashiach, the Messianic age. So what we have here is, we have a historical connection, a historical process, which begins with the giving of the Torah and ends with the Messianic age, where good first extricates itself from that prison of evil, and ultimately is strengthened and strengthened and strengthened to the point that it can overpower evil entirely. Now he writes that first step at Matan Torah was achieved through the Shofar. And we find historically that the Shofar was present at the giving of the Torah. The Shofar was the instrument through which that tikkun began. V'hashlamas hatikun lasid lavo, and the completion of that tikkun will also take place through the Shofar. As we know, the Shofar Gadol of Yemos HaMashiach. And he writes, why is the Shofar of Yemos HaMashiach called a Shofar Gadol by contrast to the Shofar of Matan Torah? Because again, at the time of Matan Torah, the tikkun was incomplete. So the Shofar is the Shofar cotton, so to speak, the smaller Shofar. At the time of Mashiach, it's the Shofar Gadol, because then the tikkun is complete. So there are bookends. We have the original Shofar, which is the Shofar of Matan Torah, and we have the ultimate Shofar, which is the Shofar of Yemos HaMashiach. And the Shofar that we blow in the interim years strengthens this tikkun. It continues the process. It advances the process which began at Matan Torah and will culminate in Yemos HaMashiach. That's the idea of our Shofar. And the truth is, it sounds like a very mystical idea, but if you look in our prayer, we say in Rosh HaShana, this is exactly what it says. The brach of Shofros, the introduction begins talking about the Shofar of Matan Torah, and the conclusion talks about the Shofar of Yemos HaMashiach. And in between we have our Shofar. That's a very interesting thing. The Medrash says that where did these two Shofars come from? The Shofar of Matan Torah and the Shofar of Yemos HaMashiach. Where did they come from? Where did God get them from? So the Medrash says that they were the two horns of the ram of Avraham Avinu. The left horn, which is the smaller horn, was the horn of Matan Torah, and the right horn, which is the larger horn, is the horn of Yemos HaMashiach. Now, do we take that literally? I don't know. Rav Dessler writes that it can be understood figuratively. It means that whatever was accomplished at Matan Torah, and whatever will be accomplished at the Messianic age on the national level was achieved already by Avraham Avinu on the individual level. In other words, whatever was achieved at Har Sinai, and whatever will be achieved in Yemos HaMashiach, Avraham Avinu achieved at the Akedah. And perhaps we could venture to say that that's why we are able to do it. We were only able to do what we did in Matan Torah, and we'll only be able to do what we will do at the Messianic age, because Avraham Avinu already laid the groundwork at the Akedah. But the Akedah symbolizes the fact that we are links in a chain. That's what the Shofar symbolizes. That there is a plan, there is a destiny, there is a scheme for history to bring us from the Tikkun of Matan Torah to the Tikkun of Yemos HaMashiach, to suppress evil, to enhance good. And this is something that we have to work and strive for. And that's the Shofar that we blow every year to advance this process, to bring us one step closer to the successful culmination of this process. Yes?
So picking up on the thought that the Shofar itself has intrinsic importance, why have we not over the years incorporated the Shofar in our homes? In other words, why doesn't everybody go out and buy a Shofar and put the Shofar on the table together with the honey and the apple, so that it's a constant reminder that the Shofar has this strong...
I don't know, maybe.
Why is it just hearing it?
Maybe it's an idea, right? Maybe if there's a symbolism in the object, maybe we should be more conscious of the object. I don't know. I hear what you're saying.
But there is no mitzvah in seeing the Shofar.
No, but this is the point. The point is that if there is something to the object, that's exactly his question. Why is it that it's only the sound of the Shofar that's the mitzvah, and there is no mitzvah to see it, to hold it? He's raising a good point. He's raising a good point. But in any case, this is the idea of the Shofar. Now this teaches us a very important thing, by the way. You know, the person who lives his life in the Havlei Hazman, he lives his life in the Havlei Hazman. You know, his life is, you know, eating, drinking, sleeping, sports, entertainment, TV, etc. Why does he live that way? It's because he doesn't see himself as part of something grander, something vaster, something cosmic, something global and historical. He sees himself as living in a specific place, in a specific time, disconnected from the rest of society, disconnected from reality. All there is himself, his preferences, his tastes, his pleasures, and so on and so forth. In other words, the truth is, it's a narrow life. It's a very narrow life. A life which is concerned really with oneself, one's amusements, one's passions. Is really quite a narrow life. A person who has the broader picture of things, and who sees that I am part of the scheme of history. I am part of the advancement from the giving of the Torah till the Messianic age. I am moving the world closer and closer and closer to its ultimate fulfillment. Such a person lives his life differently. You know, people that are doing important things don't have time to waste. Right? They don't have time to waste on trivialities. They don't have time to waste on nonsense. They are doing important work. How many Nobel Prize winners watch 5 hours of TV a day? My guess is very few. But how many high school dropouts do? My guess is a lot more. Right? No, I'm saying that anecdotally. Right? But it would seem like that. It would seem that if you see yourself as being engaged in something which is very, very, very important, that it doesn't only affect you, but you affect the entire world, then you'll live your life differently. And that's what the Shofar is all about. The Shofar reminds us that this is not our world. We are living in God's world, and we are part of a plan for history. It's true we are living at a specific time in a specific place, but we are links in that chain that stretches from the giving of the Torah to the Messianic age. We are moving the process forward, and every act that we do makes a big difference. The person who lives the personal life can perhaps understand that his choices may affect himself. But he certainly can't imagine that his choices could affect the entire world. That's what the Shofar tells us. The Shofar tells us that we are part of something which is much more grand. That's what the object of the Shofar, alluding to the Akedah, which in turn alludes to the Shofar of Matan Torah and the Shofar of Yemos Mashiach, tells us that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And therefore the Rambam says, Lefikach, therefore he says that a person has to see himself that way. He has to understand that his actions make a difference not only for himself, but for the entire world. That if he does one extra mitzvah, he could perhaps save the entire world, meaning this plan that God has for history would have been aborted except for the fact he did the one mitzvah that's necessary. Or, to the contrary, it would progress except he did the Aveira, which will result in the whole scheme being aborted. Yes?
But you said that Abraham Avinu already accomplished this by the Akedah.
No, I didn't say that. I said that in his personal life he accomplished that. Right? In other words, he achieved that level, and therefore that gives us the ability to do what we have to do, but we may choose not to do it. Right?
So he gave us the ability to do it personally, or is that being transferred out of
No, at the national level. Right? But it's raising this point that what the Shofar symbolizes is that we are not simply living for ourselves. We are part of God's historical plan for creation, and this is a plan which stretches from the giving of the Torah till the Messianic age. And everything we do, the choices we make, are not just for ourselves. We make a difference globally. And therefore the Rambam says that when you have the hint of the Shofar, then you, lefikach, therefore, you have to see yourself as if you're 50-50, and as if the entire world is 50-50, and how one mitzvah, one of there you do, makes all the difference. You know, sometimes, let me give you an illustration. There could be the plan for history could be very much at risk of again being aborted. You know, we think about God's plan. Certainly, the Messianic line, Malchus Beis David, is certainly part of that. You know, the Mashiach is meant to be a descendant of David HaMelech. But there was one time, one juncture in history where there was a danger that the entire Messianic line would have been wiped out. There was a queen, Asalia, who wanted to usurp the kingdom for herself. She killed all her children, she killed all the heirs to the throne, and she made herself queen. Which of course is not consistent with the halacha. There was one child that was spared. His name was Yoash. And he was saved by hiding him in the Kodesh HaKadoshim for years. And later he was able to come out, and Asalia was deposed, and he became the king. And he was the only survivor of the entire Messianic line, Malchus Beis David. If not for him, it would have been lost, and that would have been really the end of history. You know, sometimes you find yourself at a crossroads where everything is at risk, and it could be one person or one act that makes all the difference in the world. That's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says if a person sees himself properly as being in the position where one mitzvah, one aveira can affect the entire world, that is not arrogant or pompous. That is being realistic, because it's a fact. It may be the case. And that's what the Shofar hints to. The Shofar hints to that fact, that we are part of a plan, and therefore every one of us plays a role which could make a difference, and therefore we have to see ourselves that way. Our actions make a lot of difference. So think about it for a second. Let's say you really believe that whether I do this mitzvah now or do this avera now could tip the scales of the entire world. So would this be the time to relax with a beer and your favorite whatnot? No, this would be a time to take life seriously. Now, again, I'm not a party pooper. I'm not saying that people should not engage in recreation. What I'm saying is that even when you engage in recreation, it has to be with a cheshbon. The human being isn't a machine. The human being needs relaxation and so on and so forth. So a person has to calculate how much relaxation do I need? How much recreation do I need to be healthy mentally and physically fit to be able to function properly? Right? But if a guy, for example, and I know people like this, if a guy, works productively 1 hour a day and sits practicing the guitar 12 hours a day because he needs to unwind, something is in imbalance. Right? You shouldn't take 12 hours to unwind from 1 hour of minimally productive activity. Right? Everyone needs, if he was working or learning or doing something with himself 12 hours a day and he wants to practice his guitar 1 hour a day, I would say that sounds great to me. Right? That's a very good hobby, and it provides good recreation. It's a creative activity, and it really is cultivating a talent. And I'm all for it. I'm not a person who believes that keep your nose to the grindstone. But when it becomes an obsession the other way, then you have to wonder yourself, what kind of world is the guy living in? Is he living in reality or is he living in dream world? And I think that these types of questions we have to ask ourselves, and the fact we don't ask ourselves is because we don't see ourselves as part of something which is more important than our own little world. And that's what the Shofar teaches us. The Shofar teaches us we're part of something bigger. And therefore, if we're part of something bigger, we have to see ourselves realistically, that our actions can make all the difference in the world. That's a very sobering thought, but that's what Rosh HaShana compels us to believe.
It seems to me that this whole shir ties into one of the 3 hints that you gave.
Yeah, why did you give us those 3 again? You started off with the 4th one.
Because one of them was be indispensable to a bigger thing than yourself.
Right, yeah.
Right? And Rambam is defining this as you are that. Right? Now, whether you'll be a positive or negative influence on that is a separate issue.
That's your choice.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's saying that you're not looking for the shul to belong to. You're already there. You're already part of that.
He's saying you are. You are.
There's no way out.
Yeah,
in a way.
That's true. I hear that. Anyway, on that very frightening, sobering thought, let me wish you all a very, very happy, sweet New Year. And let me assure you that if you go into Rosh HaShana with serious thoughts, you will be ahead of the game. Most people don't take it seriously. So if over the course of Rosh HaShana you have time to reflect and think, and you may come to different conclusions, which is also fine. But the idea is that every minute of Rosh HaShana should be used constructively. There's a famous story, very lovely story. There's a custom in Rosh HaShana not to eat nuts. Because the Hebrew word for nut, egos, is the same gematria as chet, which is sin. Really it's off by 1, but in gematria that's okay. So egos is the gematria of chet, which is sin, so you don't eat nuts. So the Kosker Rebbe said that chet is also the gematria of chet. Right? If you want a good sign for the new year, don't do any averos in Rosh Hashanah, because chet is also the gematria chet. We should hope that Rosh Hashanah is a pristine day, perfect day. Everything should be as ideal as it could possibly be, and that will get the year off on the right foot. And I think that part of that is that our thoughts should be serious, not frivolous. Think about life, think about ourselves, think about our role, think about what we can do, what we can be. And if we have serious thoughts, then I think we will be getting the year off on the right foot. And the entire year we will take ourselves seriously. We will be serious people, which is something which is very, very, very special. Because God knows most people in the world are not serious. They just don't think about it. I can't say most who might have, I've never done a study of this, but it just seems anecdotally, right, that the vast majority doesn't take itself very seriously. And we have to pick up the slack. Okay, everyone, have a very happy, sweet New Year, a great Rosh HaShana. Bezrat Hashem will be next week.